All right, T2. This thing is due August the 2nd. Treasurers, you hate that date. It's better than it used to be. It used to be due July 15th. Okay? Because the treasurer's got to close the books, get final numbers to somebody, put them on the T2. What we need to do is we need to report all the expenses that we incurred in the previous year for transportation. If you don't file a T2, you totally blow it off. It will not impact on your regular ed funding. But I promise you, you will not get a special ed dollar next year. And you won't find out about that mistake until next January, and by then it's too late to fix it. All right, so that T2 is really important to you. So here's where you need to collect data all year long. This is, I talked about this early on today, it was out of order. This is not something you want to start thinking about on July 1st. It's too late then, all right? You're SOL. You need to start thinking about this all year long. And I would encourage everybody in the room, treasurers and supervisors, work together throughout the year, maybe quarterly. Run that Bud Sum report, run the account summaries of the different things you're doing, and sit down together and look at them and make sure things look right. It's a whole lot easier to check things along the way than it is to wait until the 11th hour. Here's where we have to start splitting up regular expense and special expense. They went to sleep. That's all right. All right, there's a couple of basics we got to talk about. Dollars get rounded. Personnel counts can now be put in as fractions. The personnel counts that you put on the T2, they don't drive any funding. It's just an information thing, so don't lose sleep over that. The dollar figures, yeah, it's a little different story. All right?
How about if you don't, like we don't have an actual mechanic, we farm it out. Should we keep the labor cost separate for that mechanic and put it in that mechanic?
Nope. What's going to happen is if you contract out your labor, it's going to show, treasurers help me out, what is this, a 423? It's an outside purchase that actually gets reported in with the maintenance and repairs. That's where it's going to show up. So if you are a non-garage district, your maintenance and repair line item is going to look higher because that's where that cost shows up. I can tell that at a glance by looking at your report, because when I look up at your personnel costs, you got no mechanics. So what you are not supposed to report on T2 are your field trip costs, treasures. This is the extra labor. That's why you're tracking labor for your drivers separately. You got routine labor for when they're running routes, then you got extra labor when they're doing extra assignments. So that extra assignment labor does not get reported. The instructions say you can't report costs for transporting students less than 1 mile. I'm going to say to you, I don't think there's anybody in the room that's running an entire bus route that's within 1 mile from schools, right? All your routes are, we run them like spokes in a wheel. You go out, you work your way in. So you don't have dedicated less than 1 mile costs. If you are getting a grant from someone else, who knows? Maybe Mr. Trump sends you a check for $1 million to subsidize your transportation. You would have to reduce your reported expenditure. All right, you can't double dip. And if you're in a consortium, sounds like we only have one in the room. And in consortiums, you can only report the cost for a child once. There's always an unreimbursed cost for every child. The second entity can't report that and get a percentage of that back. So we only report cost once. You have this worksheet in your packet. Here's how I do these worksheets. You're going to start with the column on the right. because that's the easiest. And you're going to fill in your total costs for every one of these line items on that column on the right. Don't even think about regular special ed. So treasurer and transportation director sit down together and you come up with your total transportation cost for every line item, you fill it in. The next step is to figure out what special ed costs we can identify directly. So what could we identify directly? Labor for a particular driver, right? Bus aids or attendants, whatever you call them. What else could we pick up directly?
Harnesses or...
Yeah, adjuncts, seating adjuncts, harnesses, child seats.
Repairs to the bus.
You could track, if you have a bus that does nothing but run special ed routes, we can track the repairs for that bus, yeah. How about special ed driver training? We can track that specifically. Anything where you can capture specific costs, we do that. And then we show those here on the special ed column. I think I have some breakdown sheets in here. I'm going to have to do it this way. So, maintenance and repair, you should be able to track that for most of your buses. You got to put tires on the special ed bus, you can track that, right? Fuel, when you report fuel, by the way, fuel is only for your student transportation. If this is where the superintendent fuels his or her limousine, subtract it. If your maintenance vehicles drink from the same tank, then what you'll have to do is you'll have to figure out on your invoices how much of the fuel to deduct from the invoice, because we can only charge off transportation fuel. Insurance, again, look for just transportation fleet. Supplies. There's a line on this report that says supplies. Think of supplies as garage consumables, kitty litter, maybe a barrel of lube grease, because you don't really track how much grease you put into steering knuckles and things like that. Mechanics uniforms could be supplies. And then other is a catch-all. This should not include capital expense. So if you build a new bus garage, that's not other. This report is only for operational expenses. If you have to have the gas buoy meters for your fuel pumps rebuilt, that would go into other. If you have an annual maintenance fee for your routing software, that's an other.
Travel expenses.
So capital outlay wouldn't, so not cameras?
It's
or anything
not
like that?
capital outlay, it's operational based expenses.
So cameras would not be.
Not cameras, no.
Would that be like meetings, trainings?
So meetings or trainings, there's actually a separate line item. If we run up the page for, it's line 13, that's training.
No, they argued no, that was not training, that is only for driver training. My training was not allowed to be included in that.
Who said that?
People?
Good answer.
So,
Maybe Jesus knows the truth, right?
this goes back to what's the intent of the report? What's the state trying to track here? How much it costs to perform this operation? Where does it say just drivers? State needs to know what all the expenses. You know, I would argue if it's only driver training, then how come your retirement gets to get posted down here too? How come the mechanic's retirement gets included too? These are the operational expenses for your transportation operation.
I was told I had to go under other, travel expenses, meetings, all that had to go under other.
Okay, well, I guess you got a different answer today.
What about, so in that same area then, so if you are doing training and you are paying your drivers extra to be there,
I would call that a training cost.
a training cost, okay?
So if you didn't hear his question, if we're paying our drivers to come to an in-service or to go to an in-service, to me, that's a training cost. You have two costs, one for the service you're hiring and one to pay the drivers to be there.
Correct.
I mean, their hours would pay them, like, pull it out?
Mhm.
I was told no on that too.
I guess you just gotta pick better classes to go to.
Tell me.
All right, so identify the total costs, and then we're gonna figure out what special ed costs are. We're gonna subtract them from the total, and what's left by default is your regular ed. It's much easier to manage the exceptions here, and the exceptions are the special ed cost. So, the things we can easily identify: driver salary, benefits package, special ed training, special equipment, maintenance, repair. So those things are fairly easy. If bus 9 is a special ed bus, we can probably track most of that. Right? But there's some other things that's kind of hard to do. Like, how much of your time do you think you spend supervising special ed? And every supervisor in the room is going to say all of it, because that's what it feels like. Right? How about office staff? You know, how much of your utilities goes towards special ed? These are things that I call overhead. So for every one of these overhead items, what we're going to do is figure out what percent of your workload is special ed. And then we're going to apply that to the total, charge that off to special ed, and what's left is regular. So how should we do that? This goes back to something, and we already laid the groundwork for this. We need to talk the same language. And here's where we need to forget about anything that's called a bus. We need to think about trips. All right? Buses run lots of trips. We do our accounting by trips. So in a double routing plan, all of your buses are running 4 trips per day, right? In a triple routing plan, most of your buses are running 3 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, although it's never 100%. So some of them will have a few less. I want you to consider each trip separately, and that's where we started over here. That way you can call some trips regular ed and some trips special ed. And that's really going to help us when we identify costs. And then I want you to build a picture of your bus fleet. When your funding is calculated for transportation, there is no funding calculated based on the special ed information on your T1. That would be pointless, because during the year everything's going to change. So on the T2, you're filing your final report on how many special education children you transported during that year. And so if you had a kid from September to December and then they moved away, you still get to report that child. But if you had a new one that moved in January, you now get to report this child too. So the T2 is your final cost summary for regular ed. It's also your final cost summary for special ed. It's also your final number on how much work you did for special ed. And I will tell you that when we laid out that report in the computer system, I wanted that to be a whole page. Instead, it's just 3 questions. And those 3 questions get skipped more than any other part of the T report. And if you leave one of those 3 questions blank, you get no special ed transportation money. So, bookends
T1 and T2. However, there's another element to the T2 that's a standalone, and that's special education.